through. The question is, and if anybody here has the answer to this, because I certainly don't, if you are processed through an illegal adoption agency, then can you not get an F4?
You mean illegal adoption agency in the sense that the adoption agency in the receiving country was illegal, then I think it shouldn't be a problem as long as you have the Korean documentation to show that you were adopted. And you should be able to get that, though since it was illegal, I'm not sure you can get your hands on that. Even then, there should be a Korean documentation on your adoption anyway. Whether that documentation is actually, you know, your real documentation, that's another discussion, but there should be adoption documentation on you, except if it was so illegal that they didn't process you through any of the 4 agencies, because that could also have happened, and then it becomes a whole lot more complicated, because there are known cases where people figure out that they are technically still Korean, and that they were just taken out of the country legally without any proper process of renunciation of Korean citizenship, etc., etc., etc. So you may open a box of Pandora when you actually start to figure this out.
So I hope that answers that question, but I would also recommend that somebody get in touch with the Global Overseas Adoptees link, GOAL, which is based here in Korea and has helped, you know, with the dual citizenship, the F4 visa, and can answer some of those questions for you and point you to the right resources. So
feel free to freely answer. What does it mean to be Korean to all of you?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like I really struggled to identify as Korean until I came here. I did not really have any Asian friends growing up. So my family, I think my adoptive parents had like the perfect balance of, you know, presenting Korean culture to me, and like my adoption was never a secret. Obviously, I looked different from them. But you know, people would ask me where I'm from, and then, you know, I say Korea, but like I never identified as Korean American, because to me the Korean American experience is a very unique thing, and it's not mine. I didn't grow up with, you know, parents who didn't speak English or cooking Korean food in the home. I didn't go to a Korean church. I went to like a Catholic church with like a bunch of, you know, Scandinavians and Irish people. So like, I really struggled to identify even as Asian American, because, you know, the Asian American experience is so close. It's very unique, and I realized that, you know, we are a part of that as well. But it was really, I did not identify. I didn't even know what to identify as until now being here. And you know, we were kind of talking about this earlier. I wrote in the essay in the post that, you know, dual citizenship, I'm really fortunate that like I don't have to go to the military. It really did not have a lot of negative consequences for me. And you know, in the future, there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to get it, but I mean, one of them is just that like no one can doubt that I'm Korean now, which I thought was more of like something outwardly that I would use when I go back to the West. But I actually found that like in Korea, I didn't expect Korea to be so xenophobic. And so to have, you know, I mean, I've been in so many situations where they're just rude to me because I'm tan and like I don't look super Korean. And I hear, like at my gym once, there was like an incident and they were like, oh, they said in Korean, like, don't worry, he's not Korean, because I was speaking English. And then they pulled up my account and it had my Korean name. And I like gave them my like Jumin card for like Koreans. And like all of a sudden there was like the deep bow and like, it just was like, so, anyway, to go back to like the original question, like I've only been able to identify as Korean American personally since moving here like a year and a half ago. And so to me, like being Korean is like, I'm happy that like we are able to kind of like change like what it is to be Korean, because within Korea it's so specific. And even my Korean American friends who grew up speaking Korean, speak great Korean, and like, you know, they get the hair and they like dress the Korean way. There's like, if there's something a little bit off about them, automatically they're like clocked as being Kyopo, and like they're not you know, of that. And even if it's like for Koreans who go to college in the United States or Europe or wherever, they are sometimes not even seen as like Korean enough. And so I think like the more of us, like the more that Korea becomes integrated with the rest of the world, and like the more of us that like are here and are, you know, speak up, like we're challenging like what it means to be Korean. But I don't have any problems identifying as Korean. And I don't know, I think, you know, I don't plan on staying in Korea, which I also wrote about in the essay, is, you know, I'm gay and I can't get married here, and there's also no anti-discrimination law. So we're not the only ones who are struggling in Korea. There's, you know, I almost got hate crimed, and I was like, well, if I get punched and then I punch him back, like, I'm like, you know, the foreigner, even though I, you know, and that was the other thing, is like, then I can't get deported for getting in a fight because some guy was being homophobic. Like, I guess go to jail or whatever. But like, you know, I'd rather go to jail here than get deported, because I probably wouldn't get fired, actually. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't quite know where I wanted to finish off with that. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to be Korean, and I think like we are forcing that discussion to happen. Yeah, and it's I mean, Korean adoptees are the largest diaspora of adoptees, and so we are kind of the ones that are pushing that, and I hope that we can open those conversations too for other adoptees from other countries to reclaim what it means to be Guatemalan or Chinese or Honduran as well.
I think for me personally, so in the Netherlands I never really felt at home, or that I belonged there. The Dutch people, they really like to boast how tolerant their country is, but there's this subtle layer of passive discrimination, and I think you could call it. And the fact that I had a Dutch name and a Dutch upbringing didn't help with that, because I felt like I had to prove myself that I was Dutch. And whatever I did, that didn't really help with that. So I started to identify more and more as Korean as a counter move to that, I think. Simply because I lived here when I was younger, I was fluent in Korean. And I felt that gave me the right to claim to be a Korean. Even though I wasn't like culturally in touch with Korea in any other way. The Netherlands doesn't really have a big Korean community or something. My parents don't speak Korean, so we weren't really a part of that. We didn't go to Korean church, which are surprisingly many in a small country. But then I came back to Korea, and there are people who say, "Oh yeah, you're basically a Korean." And I say, "Oh yeah, I have a Dutch passport." And yeah, but everybody knows that, so it doesn't really matter. You're just Korean. And on the other hand, you have people who say, "No, you're born outside of Korea. You don't have a Korean passport, so you're not Korean. Good on you for learning Korean. Wow, you're surprisingly fluent in Korean." But the difference is that as long as I don't tell my background story in Korea, nobody would doubt for a single moment that I'm not Korean. While in the Netherlands, wherever I go, people would assume that either my parents are not Dutch or that I'm not Dutch, which is very weird, because you end up in like this limbo between two places where part of the country really you cannot really identify with, because they don't want to identify with you. And it just happens to be in both places.
Yeah.
I can react to this. Well, I have to say, but maybe it's like for a lot of people with two different ethnicities, it's just a similar experience. But it was the same when I came back to Korea for the first time. I think it was like this weird moment where I was like hoping to finally go somewhere where like a second half would be met, kind of idea, but like on a very like deep unconscious level, you know, because obviously I knew it was not going to happen like this, but then, so I was always like identified as Asian descent in Europe, like I am still, and it's very clear for Europeans. And then when I came to Korea, it was very clear that I was not at all Asian for Koreans. So I remember like saying, oh yeah, my mother is adopted, and then people were like, no, she's not Korean. You don't look Korean. Like, yes, I am. So yeah, for me it's not really easy to identify as a Korean at all. But also in the lens of maybe, and it's also not only through adoption, but also just through education, but understanding also the colonial relationships, for instance, in between France and other countries, and maybe not directly with Korea, but so for me it's also sometimes hard to identify as a French now. You see, because like my history is also a history that is linked with like big power structures in between countries. So to agree to identify as the dominant, just as the dominant culture or country, feels also very hard knowing our history. So I would say it's like the word to identify is hard. I don't identify to French or Korean. I don't know. So I don't know, it's just like, and I think this has to do with also education. We need to know our history. And for me, to know our history is more interesting to think than to identify now. So it's not so much about identity politics, but more about, yeah, like knowledge and understanding.
I'm not sure what being Korean means to me personally, but I think that there are flaws in the way that South Korean law defines Koreanness. For example, for a long time, it was only men who could pass down Korean citizenship. And that's based on this purist notion of pure male blood. And that's just like made up. So I think there's an element, I think that makes me think of race and ethnicity as not something that's scientifically, maybe not scientifically definable, and there's elements of it that's a social construct. And the way that countries choose to define, in this case Korea, South Korea, the ways in which South Korea chooses to define Koreanness is a reflection of its values as a society. So when they decided to change and make it so that women can also pass down Korean citizenship, that shows a reflection of the change in values. And I think as Korea progresses into a more globalized age, and with adoptees coming home, and with there being immigrants to this country, and people having children in Korea that don't have this so-called Korean blood, I think the definition of what being Korean is needs to continue to evolve.